Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What is the most insane, evil, funny, dumb way a spouse has tried to screw the other? Story 1. Had a client whose wife wanted him out of the house. I told him not to leave, just move to a different bedroom for the time being because once he was out, the chances of him ever getting back in were slim. He texted his wife and told her he was staying in the house. She called back and left a VM that she wanted him out, and if he wasn't out soon, she would start taking out her unhappiness on the children and would remind the children that mommy was being mean to them because daddy wouldn't leave. Story 2. I work for a divorce attorney now, but the craziest thing came to my attention when I worked for the prosecuting attorney. This couple was breaking up and Mr. left the house. Mrs. went to work the next morning as usual. When she returned home in the evening, she found Mr. had been to the house and removed his clothing and belongings as she expected. What she didn't expect was that he had also gorilla glued her belongings together. He glued the TV remote to the table, the phone to its cradle, the couch pillows to the couch, and even glued the vacuum cleaner to the carpet. She called the police and reported this as property damage. The police went with her through the house documenting dozens of items glued to various things, but for days she was discovering random things, and she would call to amend or update her report. My GD oven mitts were glued to the wall, or he glued the effing sheets together in the linen closet. I've seen people do and say really awful things to each other, but that was diabolical. Story 3. This one hits close to home because it happened between my parents. We had a family friend who was a lawyer, and my parents agreed that he would be the lawyer for both of them as a mediator. So, as the assets were being divided, my dad got absolutely slammed. She was going to get the house, cars, half his retirement, and an insane amount of alimony, to the tune of like $2,500 a month for the rest of her life. My dad has a good job as a municipal employee, but that was probably 70%-ish of his paycheck. Turns out that my mom and the family friend actually conspired to rip my dad off and make it seem like that's what a divorce settlement looks like. And she was going to kick back more money under the table after the dust had settled. Dad just didn't know how these things worked. So, after some convincing, he finally went out and got his own lawyer. He got a very fair divorce settlement after that. Mom still to this day can't understand why we don't talk to her much. Story 4. How about a wholesome, insane one? Ianal. But this was told to me by my mom regarding the divorce she got from my dad. They couldn't settle on an alimony amount. Mom and her lawyer came in with a number, Dad countered with a number. They couldn't agree, because my dad thought my mom should get twice the amount in alimony she was asking for, and my mom didn't want my dad to give her that much money for month. It took months for them to settle on a figure that appeased both of them. Even then, my mom puts aside the extra above what she wanted in case my dad ever has a financial emergency, and my dad puts aside the extra she didn't want in case my mom ever has a financial emergency. The funny thing is, they don't know the other is putting the money aside for the other. My mom told me about her emergency stash, and my dad told my brother about his emergency stash, bro, and I discussed it while talking about what nut jobs our parents are. Edit. I've gotten a lot of support for this response, thank you. I'm not going to say that their divorce was perfect, it wasn't. There were still some hurt feelings and resentment from all parties involved. However, my parents, for all their flaws, both accepted their own responsibilities for the falling apart. I think it helps that they still loved each other deeply. They just weren't in love anymore. They have been friends since my mom was 2 and my dad was 3, started dating when mom was 12 and dad was 13. They separated at the ages of 49 and 50. It makes sense that they grew apart. I've had a few people ask why they divorced in the first place. My dad had had a girlfriend for at least 15 years, possibly longer. My mom knew, but they agreed to not divorce until my younger brother had graduated high school. My dad got remarried to his girlfriend. My mom has also since remarried. All 4 of them get along famously now. The separation and divorce happened about 10 years ago. I'm very lucky to have 4 parents who care about me and who absolutely adore my own little dudes. Story 5. Worked at an airport. Big burly guy brings an ugly dog in a crate to the counter. He is clearly misty-eyed. Turns out wife got the dog in the divorce and he has to send it to her, and she told him as soon as she gets it, she is putting it down. He asks if he can have some time with the dog before the flight. So they go out in the grass and they both roll around in the grass, dog's tail just wagging away not knowing anything about his future. The guy puts him back in the crate, drops him off the counter, says thanks, and then just walked out head down and just looking crushed. That was 30 years ago and I still remember it like it was yesterday. Story 6. Divorce lawyer here. Spouse had been out of the house for weeks. She waited until he was on a business trip, came into the house, turned on all of the faucets, plugged the drains, turned off the furnace, and left. It was 10 degrees. He came back 5 days later. The house was ruined. The water froze and cracked the foundation. Story 7 TLDR. My client's spouse accused him of giving his deceased wife cancer. I represented a guy who was on his second marriage. His first wife passed away from cancer. He and his kids were obviously devastated. My client was a pretty sensitive guy with a big heart. His second wife could be very charming, which was why he fell for her. But it was all a facade. Anyway, to make a long story about a lengthy divorce short, my client met a very kind and affectionate woman during his case. They really hit it off and were basically engaged, even though his divorce was far from over. The fiancé started having health problems and was diagnosed with a form of terminal cancer. Somehow, the second wife found out about this and tried to use the cancer diagnosis against my client in court. She developed this crazy theory that my client had killed his first wife by giving her cancer and that he was doing the same thing to his fiancée. The second wife's attorney, who was quite good, refused to be a party to it. The attorney never addressed the argument in court and didn't even ask the second wife any questions about it during testimony. Rather, the attorney informed the judge that the second wife wished to address the court directly about an issue. The judge allowed her to do so, in a highly irregular move. The second wife told her crazy conspiracy theory to the judge, adding that she was certain my client had tried to give her cancer at some point as well. I wish I had an artist's rendering of the scene, capturing the second wife's crazy eyes, her attorney's look of shame, embarrassment, the judge's look of confusion, ennui, and my look of awe-inspired disgust. Story 8. I'm going to school to be a vet assistant. My teacher is a veterinarian. She told us on Monday she's had clients bring their animals in to be euthanized so their spouse couldn't have them. SMDH. Story 9. My uncle's ex tried to work it in that she would get half of whatever my grandmother would leave him when she passes. Joke's on her. My grandmother is passing over her kids. Not maliciously, my uncle is very well off and so is my mom. And leaving everything to my brother and me. Also tried to get sole custody of both of their children, who are in their 20s. Story 10. Friend was going through divorce from insane husband. He had been texting her pics of the gun he bought and threatening her. Police were called. Nothing they could do because it was only a picture. He was staying with a secret girlfriend at this point. She allowed him to go get his stuff from the house. She was scared to go back in the house alone. I went with her. First red flag was he had changed the locks. So we waited for locksmith to open the house and change the locks again. Well, when the door opens, we noticed all of the furniture was gone, so we carefully went upstairs in search of her cats. The entire second floor was empty. No cats, no furniture. Even her clothes were gone. Come to find out he hired a moving company to pack and take everything, even the food in the fridge. Finally found the cats. He had taken them to another vet in town and put them up for boarding under his sister's name, thinking she would not be able to find them. He was finally forced to disclose what happened to her possessions. He had them taken to a storage unit far away from the home. Story 11. Paralegal for divorce lawyer. This one is morbid. We represented a guy who believed vehemently that his wife was assaulting the children. The authorities were involved. Child services was involved. It was never clear what the truth was or if anything at all was going on, but our client was sure. He shot his wife dead at a custody exchange in front of the children. He then sat down and waited for the authorities. We visited him in jail with his criminal defense attorney. As we were leaving, he told me, "Well, I guess the divorce is over now." And he laughed. This was the first time I had ever been speechless. Edit. This has gotten a lot of responses. I can't really reveal details or context here. But I can safely say that defending this action as heroic or understandable is an incorrect takeaway. There are no heroes here. The trauma this man put the children through is incredibly selfish, regardless of his intentions. There are so many other options that could have been explored, many of which were being explored when this happened. He abruptly put an end to all of them, making the truth forever impossible to discern. Edit 2. Where are they now? The children are in the custody of a family member. They are safe and well, although will no doubt need extensive therapy as they get older. Guy is in jail. I'm unsure of his final sentence. However, I doubt he will ever leave. Edit 3. What did the kids say? Forensic interviews are super confidential, and this case didn't have the chance to go to a hearing. However, after multiple interviews with both children and the parents, neither the police, child services, guardian ad litem, or child advocate recommended that the mother lose custody or visitation, nor did they require it to be supervised. All of these matters were ongoing when the mother died. Story 12. I was an assistant for a family law practice, not a lawyer. So it was already a disaster of a divorce because the ex-husband was a. But it got so much worse when the wife started dating someone new with a severe cat allergy, like a year after they split up. Her psycho ex bought a cat on his time with the kids, except he's not allowed pets at his apartment. He sends the kids back to their mom's house with the cat and all its stuff. Mom is pissed because she didn't want a cat at all, plus her boyfriend is crazy allergic. She calls us asking what to do because her kids are bawling saying that she can't get rid of their new sibling, and she has the cat in the garage. Ex told kids, if mommy loves you, she'll let you keep the cat since daddy is not allowed cats at his house. Story 13. Not my divorce, but my divorce lawyer told me about a case she was involved in where both clients were so petty that they had to all meet to argue over literally every single scrap of everything. The final object that neither would settle on was a ceramic rabbit statue, a really generic one from Home Depot or whatever. Zero sentimental value, but since it was the final item, neither side wanted to lose the last thing, and they dragged it out over 3 separate meetings for this one thing. I don't remember which ended up getting it, but once they settled it and signed everything, the winning party stuck it on their lawyer's desk as a gift and walked out. Story 14. She accused her ex-husband of sexually molesting their children while under the watchful eye of the nationally endorsed social workers who oversaw his contact with them, which was only required because he didn't have his own private accommodation at the time. She also said that his Indian flatmates were inherently dirty. After the obviously false child molestation suggestion, I warned her of the consequences of being caught lying about that, i.e. an impermanent loss of custody. She fired me but kept calling back using fake names to try and obtain free advice which contradicted my advice, but everyone she called immediately spotted her. This was a long time ago and now I specialize in insurance litigation, which is far less ugly. Story 15. Not a divorce lawyer, but remember this from another Reddit. Husband and wife getting divorced. There was a classic car Ferrari, Jaguar or something like that was worth a lot of money. It was a bone of contention in the divorce. After several months, the husband finally proposes that he will let her have the car if she gives him the house. She agrees. Come to find out, he had been taking the car out every day and doing loops around the city for hours, putting thousands of miles on it, making it worth nothing. Story 16. A soon-to-be ex-husband left his wife's prized koi to die on the doorstep of their house. Apparently, the value of these fish, 6 in total, was over $100,000. She was, according to her lawyer, so distraught that she couldn't be in court. Only in LA. Story 17. I see a lot of unsubstantiated accusations of child abuse and/or molestation to deteriorate the relationship between dad and the kids. And we'll hire experts and therapists, and there will be an investigation. We'll have depositions and a trial. And after a year has passed without dad being allowed to see his children, and thousands of dollars have been spent, it will come out that nothing happened. This happens in my practice about once or twice a year. Very common. Story 18. Paralegal for a divorce lawyer here. Our client told us he didn't clear out the marital account after the parties filed, which technically is true because while he removed $45,000, he left about $3, $50 in there. Story 19. I'm not a divorce lawyer, but my prior employer once was served with an obviously forged garnishment order from an employee's ex-wife, directing garnishment of his wages in an amount that far exceeded his actual wages. We reported it to the police department. Story 20. I worked at a computer repair store as a sales technician. Had a guy come in with a desktop that he wanted Windows reinstalled. I asked him if he wanted me to back up all of his data first, and he told me that he had everything he wanted and just do the wipe. I put it in the queue and he paid and left. And I started it about an hour later since an XP install was only about 45 minutes off the network. I didn't bother doing anything else except deleting the original partition and making a new one and installing Windows. About an hour after that, his wife came running in asking if we had a computer with Smith as the last name. I told her I did, and she showed me her ID and said that her husband brought it in to try and destroy all the proof of him cheating and stealing money from their business. When she asked if I had wiped everything yet, I told her I just did a Windows install and didn't actually really wipe anything. I called her husband and told him the situation. I told him his wife was here to get the computer. He asked me if I reinstalled Windows like we spoke about, and I told him I had. He told me, I don't give her the computer. There isn't anything left on it anyway. I said all right and hung up. I told her that he said I could give it to her, and then explained to her how reinstalling Windows doesn't magically delete everything, and explained to her how I could recover all of her files in a couple of hours. I ended up staying late that night and she bought me pizza and Mountain Dew. I ended up recovering every file he tried to have me destroy and made multiple copies for her. She ended up calling him from the store and reading off some of the messages he had tried to delete from his emails. I was worried that he might try to come back in and confront me, but nothing else ever came of it. Story 21. I didn't handle the divorce, I handled parts of the aftermath. In the divorce, she went AWOL, was living in a truck somewhere, and just couldn't handle it mentally. He gave her 5 of his 9 companies. They were the ones that owed 7 figures in payroll taxes. He had made her the bookkeeper on paper. She spent decades trying to shake the IRS for the results. Story 22. Not my case, but during my first year of law school, lawyers from different practices came to give us a peek behind the curtain of different areas. The divorce lawyer told the story of rather well-to-do couple that spent months and months and many tens of thousands of dollars fighting over absolutely everything, all the way down to a single ceramic ashtray. He couldn't remember the significance, but somehow it had come through the husband's family. Even after everything else had been decided, they spent many more months and nearly $100,000 fighting over just this ashtray. Then, after a court hearing, the wife finally won the ashtray. She promptly strode out to the white courthouse steps and smashed the ceramic ashtray, left the pieces all over for the husband to see on his way out. Decided that day I would not be a divorce lawyer. TLDR. Spent $100K to win an ashtray only to smash it in spite. Story 23. Once had a boss who had to leave his house for 6 hours while his ex-wife grabbed all the belongings she was legally entitled to. When he returned home, every handle was gone. Doorknobs, cabinet handles, drawer handles, anything that was screwed onto something and used to open it, she had taken. Every day for the next week, he would occasionally yell out, "She took the fucking knobs!" Story 24. Not a divorce lawyer, but my grandma, her divorce lawyer before she served her husband the papers, got pregnant and then convinced her husband it was his. He paid child support for 18 years and never had a clue. Pretty shitty, the lawyer had a family of his own. They have no idea my mom and my family exist. Story 25. Have a friend who went through a nasty divorce and his ex was vengeful as despite him having done nothing wrong like cheating, lying, etc. Basically, he got laid off from good job and the loss of status embarrassed her, especially as he took to being stay-at-home dad and their kids adored him. Never mind she had MBA and 6-figure job herself. She would buy expensive on credit cards to show high expenses, then return it for cash or store credit so that the refund didn't go back on card, so that she could try to get more support. To just get a job, he took one at Home Depot. He'd been an engineer at a tech company. Later on, he landed an IT consulting position that was part-time but paid about what he made at HD working full-time. She petitioned the courts to try and force him to have a full-time job, basically wanting to force him to spend 30 more hours to earn same. Part of his custody granted him dinner one night week with the kids, i.e. on 5 to 7 p.m. He asked for it to be school pickup to 7 p.m. instead, and she refused that even though from 3-5 they were at home with a nanny who had to be paid for that time while mom was at work. Story 26. Former divorce lawyer. Not so much insane, but unfortunately common. Accusing former spouse of molesting the children and domestic violence to retain full custody and get a restraining order to force spouse Yui of the marital home. This sets the new status quo for custody, which judges are reluctant to disrupt considerably down the road. Takes months, if not years, for accused spouse to prove his innocence, and CPS will often find evidence where none exists if accusing party is a good enough manipulator / actor. Pretty horrendous long-term outcome for all parties. Kids are brainwashed against estranged parent when young. Later, they often grow to resent the accusing parent for poisoning their relationship with estranged parent. Kids often grow up with multitude of mental health issues. Probably one of the worst things a person can do to their children. All to win against their former spouse. Story 27. I'm a lawyer, but have had a very limited amount of experience in divorce cases. The first case I ever worked, the husband shaved, waxed every single hair off his body in an attempt to avoid a court-mandated drug test. Edit. A word. Story 28. I'm not a divorce lawyer, but my parents got divorced about a year ago. My mom didn't want my dad to show up in court because he would contest and then they'd have to split the assets. She phoned me and told me to put laxatives in his food so he wouldn't be able to make it there. Story 29. Not a lawyer, just grew up with a shitty family situation. My mom was an evil mastermind with this divorce, let me tell you. So my parents had been separated but living in the same house for a while, and it was around the time of year the family would normally go for a camping trip. Canada Day, I believe. She convinced my dad that we would break the trip up and he would get a week. Then when he returned, she would get a week with us, the 3 kids. Secretly during my dad's week, she got her friends to help clear the entire house out. And I literally mean clear it out. There was nothing left. Not a single clothes hanger, no couches, TVs, quite literally nothing. She chose this vacation setup really well too. Camping meant we didn't need money or have access to cell service, which she took advantage of as well and emptied the bank accounts and hid all the money away. She didn't stop there though, she also maxed out lines of credit and all credit cards. Normally this would take a while, but she was smart, as in this approach. Earlier when planning this divorce, she had convinced my dad to quit his job, quite high paying I should add, to start a company. This company was still new and needed a ton of expenses paid, so the banks didn't think twice about this ridiculous amount of money being transferred, as it wasn't out of the norm anyways from their new setup with the company. Then, when it came time for my dad's trip to end, she told him he needed to call her when he got back in cell range. Upon calling, she told him that she was on the way out in the same direction anyways, so we could just meet halfway to spare us kids a bit of driving time on our way to the next trip. Which was odd, considering after a week of camping we all wanted to shower and clean up, but she was very adamant. We met up and swapped vehicles, then my dad was on the way home alone, while we were off to hide away at a location different than where she had told my dad. When he got home, he thought we had been robbed. It didn't sink in. He called the cops and started phoning family because of how empty the house was. He broke down and didn't know what to do. That's when my mom's dad came over and told him the truth. He said she left him and took everything. She hid us, and I believe tried to steal us, but that part is a bit fuzzy for me. Eventually, it somewhat caught up with my mom. The judge was shocked at what she did. She even went as far as trying to convince us kids that my dad was abusive and had us interrogated by a cop wanting us to lie about him. The whole situation was crazy. She ended up blowing all the money on fancy trips and shopping sprees with her friends, and when the judge ordered her to pay it back, she fled the country. Now she lives in Australia and doesn't have to pay anything. Story 30. My dad is a divorce attorney. His clients couldn't decide who would get the Labrador puppies from a new litter they just breed. The pups are worth $1,000 a pop. Well, they also hadn't been up to date on their payments. So Dad brought a litter of 8 floppy puppies home as collateral for us to have until they could negotiate the settlement. So much fun for us kids. Story 31. Most malicious thing I know of personally involved a coworker of mine. He was sleeping with a married woman, and ultimately the husband found out she was having an affair. Really ugly divorce ensues, during which they fought over a lot of assets, but the real point of contention was their dog, lovely GSD named Orion. Eventually, husband gets custody of the dog, and in under a month, has the dog put down, just to hurt her back for the affair. Edit. When I posted this, I thought this situation was a rarity, and have shock and awe value from the cruelty at work. After reading the responses in this thread, not only am I saddened by how many pets get caught in the crossfire, but I am genuinely shocked by the lengths some people will go for petty vengeance. Story 32. Husband and wife. Divorce. After husband finds out wife is sexting other guys. He goes into a deep depression. They didn't have much. Lots of debt and 2 dogs. One was a dog he had had since before the marriage. He got her. The other dog was only about 3 years old and was bought to keep the older, 7-year-old dog company while they worked. Wife demanded that since he got his dog that she got the other. He is depressed and just wants to move on, so he agrees. She gets the dog and has it put down the next day. She didn't want the dog, she just wanted to hurt him. Story 33. I don't practice divorce law, but I did an internship with a family law judge in law school that involved me sitting in on a lot of stuff. One divorced couple came in because the ex-husband wanted to lower his spousal support payments due to his lowered income, great financial responsibilities, and the fact that his ex-wife was declining to seek paid employment, all of which sounds reasonable on the face. It turned out that while his income had been lowered due to cuts, his new wife, who technically worked as his assistant and had done so prior to the divorce, was now making quadruple her salary, more than he ever had. He claimed that his ex-wife had unpaid renters living with her and could have money to survive if she charged them rent. It turned out they were the couple's shared 18-year-old twins who were living at home having just graduating high school and were going to keep living at home while starting college in the fall. It also later turned out that he allowed his stepdaughter and her 2 children to live with him, and his wife rent-free and paid for her college. His ex-wife produced evidence that he told his own kids to figure out paying for college themselves. He claimed that his ex-wife worked as a nanny for free by choice and should be getting paid for work elsewhere. The kids she watched for free were their 3 joint grandchildren from their eldest child, 2 of which were severely disabled. He claimed that when he married his new wife, he gained over 15 new dependents, which was technically true. But those dependents were all in Mexico and included his new wife's grown siblings and their families, none of whom he had ever met. This dude was shocked when spousal support wasn't decreased. Story 34. Not a lawyer. But my partner has a mate who was going through a messy divorce. He registered as a gambling addict and went to some Gambling Anonymous, or whatever it's called, and proceeded to go to the casino every day, taking wads of cash with him, pretending to gamble it all away while he was secretly squirreling it all away. That way, when it came to the divorce and he was questioned where all his money went, he could prove that he lost it all through his gambling addiction and never had to pay her a penny. Story 35. I read about a case where the wife was trying to take half of a guy's business and millions in personal assets, only to find out that the business had been moved into his son's name years earlier, and the guy donated all their savings, millions of dollars, to a children's hospital in his soon-to-be ex-wife's name so she couldn't get the money. The judge said what he did was technically legal since it was community property, and no freeze had been placed on it yet, but was morally unconscionable. Lawyer said in his entire life he never saw a bigger smile on a man's face. He just kept saying, "I just wanted to help the children," and smiling. Story 36. I am an interpreter who works frequently with police and lawyers. The most out there thing I ever interpreted in court went like this. Ms. So-and-so, we know each other for a long time, correct? Yes. As a matter of fact, we have known each other for 5 years, correct? Yes. And at the end of each and every meeting we had during the past 5 years, we always agreed on one thing, correct? Yes. Please tell the judge what we agree on. It's not okay to break in my ex's apartment and lick all his cutlery. Yet, here we are, Ms. So-and-so. I died. Story 37. Personal experience. Unbeknownst to me, my ex was having an affair. I worked a lot of hours, so I didn't pick up on it. We had always dreamed of buying a house on a huge local lake to retire in. We literally started shopping for houses and even toured a dozen or so. We found 2 well within our budget, but would need to sell our house first. My wife convinced me to take out a couple loans in my name and get a couple credit cards, again in my name. Most of the bills were in hers and the mortgage was in hers, so I did. I spent about $25K in CC and loans to fully update our house and get it ready for market. As soon as the work was done, she told me she was leaving me and wanted to sell the house. Story 38. Wow, today is my day. Another where to start? The person who hid $250,000 from a business sale so it wouldn't be included in the equalization payment while providing frank disclosure on the actual sale number? The person who made a fake prostitution ad for their ex as proof that they were not a good parent without considering that I would want to know why they browsed prostitution ads during their parenting time. The ones who spent thousands of dollars working out the appropriate access, custody, and support terms. For their dog? Hard to say. Unreasonable people keep my lights on. Edit. To add the one that bothered me the most. It wasn't my file, but I was in court that day for another matter. A local police officer had a family law conference. Coincidentally, a bunch of officers from his force and neighboring forces decided to attend family court that day and stand in the hall outside the one family law courtroom. A dozen officers, in full uniform, there to provide support to their brother, I guess. His ex had to walk through a gauntlet of uniformed officers to get to court. This one really bothered me, and still does. If I had been her lawyer, I would have raised a storm for trying to intimidate my client, and potentially trying to intimidate me. Story 39, I annul but work in the court system. Once case that came in was a couple divorcing on mutual terms. The husband had one child with her, and the wife had a child from the previous marriage. He agreed to pay child support for both children. I guess he really cared about this other enough to support her, even though it isn't his obligation. Judge signs the order, they go to set up the child support account, and it gets kicked back saying you can't have two accounts for one child. Turns out she's been collecting child support from the biological father the entire time and never told him. She basically tried to milk two fathers for one child, and the other attorney knew about it. Story 40. Till. When you're about to go through a divorce, don't clean out the accounts and hide the money. Grab your pets and put them in a safe place where nobody will ever find them until the divorce is all long over. Story 41. Edited for spelling, as I was shaking while typing this out earlier today. My dad was physically and verbally abusive to my mom and my siblings. He never sexually abused us, but he was serially unfaithful to my mom and had a nasty drug habit. He left rehab so many times, I don't know why she stuck with him that long. When I was in 7th grade, he tried to kill my mom, and she finally files for divorce. And none of his outrageous claims are believed. But I was a knucklehead like my dad. Nobody could tell me right from wrong. I was just following the example I had, and it wasn't good. Mom told me to straighten up or go live with dad, and like a fool, I chose poorly. It was a year of pure. His philosophy was, the beatings will continue until morale improves, and he took it literally. He also remarried another drug addict right away. I suspect to make my mom jealous, but it backfired. During that year, he beat me, his wife, and even put my stepbrother's face through a glass coffee table when he tried to defend her from him. I decide I want to go back to live with mom, and it outraged my dad. He went off the rails for a bit. So he asked me one morning how I felt, and I told him to his face I wanted to live with mom because he was an abusive a hole. Bad idea, as I got beat. Bad. Mom calls me that night and asks why we weren't at the courthouse. Turns out he skipped the court date and said he couldn't take off work because he wanted to keep custody to make my mom miserable. This happened 2 or 3 more times. Finally, I wisened up, and the next time he asked me, I told him I changed my mind and wanted to stay with him. So he says, hop in the car. We get to the courthouse. My mom lived 2 hours away from his place because he moved right after he got engaged. So inside the courtroom, the judge asked me which parent I want to live with, and I say my mom. He asked why I was changing my mind from a year ago, and I detailed all the abuse from the last year, including intentionally skipping court dates after asking me how I was going to answer. Judge glares at my dad and dismissed me from the courtroom, and I have to sit in the hallway on the bench alone. 10 minutes later, my dad stomps out, grabs me by the arm, and drags me to the car saying the judge called me a liar and ruled in favor of my dad. But he lied and actually kidnapped me and beat my 2 hours back to his place. Oddly, it wasn't ruled a kidnapping because the judge didn't sign the ruling yet, or else my mom never pressed charges on him, but he never went to jail. She came the next Friday night with a deputy to pick me up. His new wife, I refuse to call her my stepmom, caught me packing a few belongings and told him, and he left work to try to beat me again and stop me before she could get into town. But I climbed out my bedroom window onto the roof and told him I would jump off and run away to the police station if he tried to stop me. Just as he was yelling at me, the deputy arrived and my mom was pulling up behind him, so crisis averted. I was a different teenager after that. Not perfect, but more respectful. Ended up working at 15 to help pay bills while I finished high school. I hated my life as a teenager, but it made me into the man I am now. Joined the service a month after high school and married 2 years later, promising I would break the chain of violence and abuse. We just celebrated 25 years in March, and I've never stricken my wife or cheated on her. By God's grace, it will be that way the rest of my life.